Greetings! My name is Shannon Brown, and I'm a junior undergraduate student here at Kent State University, majoring in psychology. The topic that I studied in the inclusion case study was disabilities in the field of mediation. Mediation is a form of conflict management that is less utilized in the court system. The purpose of mediation is to settle conflict with a neutral third party present. Participants are able to share their emotions in a safe environment. This process is entirely voluntary, and parties can leave the session at any time. I focused on universal design for both the mediator and participants within the mediation process. In order to have constructive dialogue, both the mediator and the participant need to feel welcome and included within the space. All parties involved need to feel that they can share their part of the story and experience equity throughout the process. In my prior research, I read a variety of different journals about the process of mediation. Within these journals, I found that most people do not know what the mediation process actually entails. They either do not know it exists, or if they have heard of it, they are unfamiliar with what the process looks like. Additionally, I found that in order to partake in the mediation process, the mediator has to determine if the parties are suitable. The key to someone being suitable is if they are able to advocate for themselves in the process, since mediation is heavily conversation-based. Once deemed suitable for mediation, the mediator has to remain unbiased throughout the entire process. Since they are the one facilitating the dialogue, this can look like making sure that each party has equitable speaking time. This helps ensure there is a fair outcome at the end of the session. Many of the articles that I found surrounded the topic of individualized education plans, or IEPs, in schools. A common route of obtaining an IEP is through mediated conversations between the school administrators and the parents and children. The mediators assist in ensuring fair accommodations for the student. Lastly, throughout the course of Principles and Methods of Community Inclusion, the topic of universal design was addressed. Universal design is when a service ensures that people of all abilities are able to utilize the service. Universal design can be used in any aspect of life, not just in the mediation field. The route that I chose to go with for the project was through an individual interview with a professor. This professor is a white female in their late 30s who uses she/they pronouns. I will utilize both pronouns throughout the course of this video. The professor identified that they had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Previously, they were misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder. The professor has over a decade of experience in the field of mediation as a mediator. They've also been in mediation sessions as a participant. The main topics that I wanted to focus on asking the interviewee were as follows: how disability can affect one in the mediation space, what universal design elements can be utilized in mediation, and how one is accommodated in mediation if need be. Mediation can be an extremely vulnerable time for the participants since they are sharing raw emotions. For the mediator, it may bring up trauma for themselves and have to listen to difficult topics. If someone's disability makes it hard for them to express emotions, it may be difficult to partake in the process. They have to be able to advocate for their needs in the process in order to come to a fair solution. That is why it's the mediator's job to determine if they are suitable for mediation, so that it is ensured they can advocate for those needs. I was curious as to how they determine the suitability. Lastly, the room itself must be accommodating to all individuals. Having never taken part in the process myself, I was curious as to what elements of universal design they use to ensure participants can utilize the space. To obtain findings from the interview, I conducted a deductive thematic analysis. I used Google Docs to clean the transcript from the interview as to identify codes within the transcript. I then used the codes to identify several themes throughout and chose the top 3 with the most evidence relating to the concept of inclusion. The first theme that I identified was that accountability is vital. The accountability that I am talking about in particular is legal. The professor stated that in the ADA mediation practice they are part of, quote, if like the organization or business that is not allegedly in compliance with the ADA and won't participate in mediation, then they may actually be investigated by the Department of Justice, end quote. This was a way that the DOJ uses accountability to ensure that inclusivity occurs in businesses. Businesses do not want to pay fines or go through an investigation, so they're more likely to participate in mediation. This theme was not supported by prior research, however. As mentioned before, mediators have to be unbiased in the mediation process. Since the mediators work for the DOJ and the ADA Mediation Office, they have a stake in the outcome, their jobs. That could lead them to being biased in the process to benefit their employer. The second theme that I found was that people must be willing to adapt to modern culture. With each generation, there are different expectations of the members within it. The professor has seen this change with the new generation of college students after the COVID-19 pandemic. They stated that the, quote, typical lecture hall performance that is known to us may not be the best form of learning for people, end quote. Students' needs are changing with time, and professors have to be willing to make accommodations for them that they may not have made in the past. It is important to ask what people need and be willing to make those accommodations for them to make the environment equitable. This theme was supported by prior research that I conducted. One style of teaching and accommodating students does not universally fit all needs. Lecture-style teaching not only provides information at a pace that is not acceptable for all users, but it is only providing information through one mode of communication. To be universal, the information needs to be presented through multiple means and at a pace that is able to be comprehended by all. The final theme that I discovered through the interview process was about giving space. By this, I mean to give people the time and resources that they need to process the emotions that they are feeling and react. As my professor stated, quote, usually more often than not, processing in a one-on-one with someone who makes us feel heard is all that's necessary, end quote. Mediation is a wonderful example of a one-on-one process that allows one to process those difficult emotions and come to a resolution to a conflict. Most conflicts stem from miscommunication. When the parties truly hear one another, they communicate well and feel validated in their emotions. Giving space is supported by prior research. Allowing parties to express their feelings comfortably contributes to creating a welcoming environment in mediation. The process is inclusive since all parties feel that they have a seat at the table to settle the conflict at hand. Before the interview, I did not know that the Americans with Disabilities Mediation Program existed, let alone that it was codified into ADA language. If there's a complaint against the ADA, the Department of Justice tries to handle it through mediation first, which I believe is a peaceful manner to do so. I also was not aware of the harsh expectations that businesses have for the mediation facilitators. To only have one person do an emotionally draining task for 40,000 plus individuals was absurd to me. They were also told that if they did not sell the mediation program to be utilized, that it would be defunded, and therefore their job as well. There are overwhelming expectations to put on one individual, which can hinder their job performance due to the stress it may cause. My first recommendation to promote inclusion in mediation is largely focused on the previous slide. I suggest having at least 2 practicing mediators in each mediation department to reduce the overload of clients on each practitioner. The overload can cause physical and mental symptoms of anxiety. The profession mentioned that this happened to them due to the pressure that they had of being the only person in the practice. With additional co-workers to depend upon, the client load can be lightened for each mediator, eliminating some of the pressure. Most participants do not know what the mediation process is, as discussed by both the professor and prior research. I recommend that each mediation practice provides printed out pamphlets to all participants to inform them of each stage of the mediation process, since it is not common knowledge. While this process is explained verbally at the beginning of mediation, the pamphlet will serve as a reference guide throughout the process. It is another mode of communication for participants of essential information if they do not process auditorial information well. The mediation process must be confidential in order to ensure safety for all those involved, which is also part of the equitable use universal design principle. Also, participants must feel comfortable throughout the process as well. To ensure comfortability and safety, the mediation process should take place in a room where no one outside of the process can listen or see in. This can be done through soundproof foam mats that drown out sound. These mats can also serve as a visual barrier to any glass part of the room where people can see in. My last recommendation is to give each participant in mediation an intake form that asks if they require any accommodations for the process to occur. The form allows businesses to prepare in advance of the session taking place. They can hire services that they do not have, such as a translator if need be. In particular, for IEPs, a mediator must navigate the parent and school district's schedule as brought up by prior research. They have to be accommodating of the different situations of each party and the needs of each to ensure that the process happens fairly. These forms can be filed electronically and re-evaluated each time someone comes in for a mediation session. Throughout the entire planning of the interview process, I wanted to make sure that the professor was comfortable sharing their story and that the interview did not inconvenience them. I made sure that the actual interview took place in a private setting where nobody could listen in. The setting was also in a time and place that was convenient to the professor's schedule, and I worked around them and their needs. In the professor's response, they at times got off the topic on mediation and talked about education. If I were to do this again, I would give participants more knowledge of the study in advance so they can think about their experiences prior to being interviewed. I think that narrowing down the topic of disability in the initial ask would have narrowed down the responses. All of my prior research came from the Kent State Library Resource Database. Therefore, the articles and journals that I read were limited to what Kent State possessed. It focused on only one type of mediation rather than the 4 types that exist. If I had asked my professor for literature that she owned, I think I would have gotten a better variety of knowledge of the field. It would have diversified the findings and questions that I'd asked if I had more research on the other styles of mediation. I strongly believe that the best way to learn about a field is to learn from those who have been immersed in it or to immerse yourself. For this particular project, learning from someone who has decades of experience in the field was the best way to learn. The professor had first-hand experience of navigating through their own disability and accommodating others. I do believe that the research was limited, though, because I only heard from one perspective. If I were to do this again, I would have a panel of interviewees to ask questions to in order to diversify the responses. This project allowed me to learn about disabilities and mediation, while also reflecting upon the world as a whole and how I go about life. This project highlighted the importance of talking to whom inclusivity directly affects. In order to accommodate someone properly, you need to ask what they need. One should not assume someone's needs, especially since they can change over time, despite it being the same person. It is important to check in with people to ensure you are providing the best possible experience for them. Additionally, I learned how timely research truly is. In high school, I was expected to conduct an experiment in one day. Those experiences led me to the false narrative that research does not take that long. To conduct only one interview, there was a lengthy process for it to be equitable and obtain reliable results. If I'm to consider doing research in the future, I must pay attention to timelines. With all that being said, there are 2 discussion questions that I would like for you to think about. First, mediation is a means of conflict resolution. What knowledge of mediation did you have before viewing/listening to this presentation? If none, discuss some means of conflict resolution that you are familiar with. Second, a common theme throughout the project was that change is necessary throughout time to best include people. Describe one time in your life when you had to change something, your mindset and activity, etc., to fit someone else's needs. Lastly, these are the resources that I used to conduct this research. I look forward to reading and responding to your discussion questions. Thank you for your time and attention.